had some people interested in how I use compressors, and I'm talking more how I use a compressor on orchestral instruments as a composer as opposed to as a mix engineer. I'm coming at this more from a kind of how can I use a compressor to shape a sound or get me a certain kind of effect, to colour a sound, as opposed to producing a kind of Deutsche Grammophon style, real classic orchestration thing. So how can we use a compressor kind of in an interesting way? Now I've got something which I've just quickly busked in, a rubbish little 8-bar pizzicato ditty. So the track sounds kind of like this. So we'll just put that in cycle so that we just cycle around it. You can hear that my violin 1 part sounds incredibly robotic, and the reason for that is I've just got CC map velocity on over here, only because I'm going to use that as the example track to set the compressor. So let's go into solo mode for that. And let's switch to compressor. I'm not going to use anything fancy. This is just Logic's compressor, and I'm just using the Platinum Digital. I'll talk a little bit about the difference between VCA, FET, and Opto compressors as well at the end. So just for now, this is just about controls. The way that I tend to start by setting a compressor, let me just show you very, very quickly what I'm talking about here. So if we look at our graph, and we have input along the x-axis and output along the y-axis. Let's pretend that's a one-to-one line. My terrible drawing skills. Oops. Let's pretend that's a straight line. You can tell that art wasn't my strong point at school. Let's call that our threshold. If you've got a compressor set to one-to-one, this is what the ratio does. Basically, nothing happens. So when you get to the threshold, for every extra 1 dB that goes in, you get 1 dB out. So it's a one-to-one line. It's a straight line. Now, if we do 1 to 2, let's pretend that that's exactly halfway between. So now what's happening is for every let's say for every 2 dB that have gone in, only 1 comes out. So for 2 dB in here, you get 1 increase in the actual volume. That's a 2-to-1 ratio. Similarly, 3-to-1 would be quite close to that. So, but 4-to-1, and let's say infinity is along the line of the threshold. Infinity being a brick wall compressor. So it doesn't matter how much extra audio you pushed in, nothing else is coming out. So it stays absolutely solid along the line of the threshold. That is the absolute volume. Nothing will go above. If you imagine you're playing something in here, that volume, let's look at the line going up there. Now you can see that if you had no compression, then you'd get the same output. That would be the volume of the output. But even with your 2-to-1 compressor, you're coming out down here somewhere. Now, typically what you would do is you would set that as the makeup gain. And you tend to have to do it by ear, really, because you're never going to know exactly, what the numbers are. But this is your makeup gain. And the reason for that is that you shift the whole thing up. Now, your quieter stuff is going to be a bit louder, but the real thing is when you're listening to what's happening above the threshold, the compressor, you want to be able to hear quite clearly. And if the volume's going up and down violently, it's really, really hard to hear. So that's the makeup gain. That's and here I've got it set probably about 6 or 7 dB. So let's get rid of this and start listening to what's going on. So we're looking at the compressor on the violin 1s. We're just in solo. Okay. So this is the way that I usually do it. I've set my knee. Okay, one more thing to explain quickly. If you imagine you're compressing kind of like that, that's your line. Here's the threshold. What the knee does is it softens it. So you start compressing a tiny bit before, and it just instead of getting that kind of hard line, it becomes more of a kind of curve. So your compression starts a tiny bit before the actual threshold, and it smooths it out so that it's not quite as abrupt. I've set my threshold so that it triggers. We can clearly hear what's going on, and that's the first thing you need to do. You need to make sure there's some gain reduction going on here when you've got obviously a ratio that's not 1-to-1. Now I've set the ratio as high as possible to make it really, really dramatically obvious what is happening for myself, so I can hear what's going on with the attack. I've set the release to be as fast as possible. Bear in mind, on some compressors like the 1176, your release is the other way round. So it goes from 1 to 7, and 7 is actually the fastest release, weirdly. So some compressors, if it's not actually written out in milliseconds, just have a look. It's really, really easy to see. You can see that this is releasing fast, and here is slow. It's keeping the sound compressed for longer. So we set that to as fast as possible, and I've set the attack to as fast as possible. When it's set as fast as possible, the attack is clamping down on the sound, and typically that will make it sound a little bit more snappy, brittle, thin. If you allow more of that initial transient through, then you'll get a kind of, you'll start to get maybe a little bit more apparent volume. You'll get a fatter, more full sound. So just have a listen to what's happening as we wind it round. So you can hear there, it's really, you're getting a kind of more naturalistic sound, obviously, as you let more of the transient through. But this is a way to really, really easily and quickly hear exactly what's happening to your transient. Now, once I've got the attack set how I want it, so let's have a quick set of that. Okay, so that's how I want the attack set. Now I'm going to set the release time. So just see what happens as I change the release time now. So here what you're hearing, there are two things that are key to the way that I listen for the releases now. The first thing that's happening is that we are maintaining the original shape in some ways of the sound. So if you imagine our sound is kind of going like that, then with the release set very, very short, we kind of turning it from a kind of spiky kind of thing into much more of a long, fat kind of thing. And the reason for that is that the compressor is very quickly taming the attack, but then also bringing up the release sound, bringing up the ambience in the room, and the tail of the actual sound of the instrument. And so you end up with something that is much less spiky and transient sounding. If, however, you want to wind it round and you really have a very slow release, then you're doing something else. You're using the loudest points as you go along to kind of pull the whole track down. Every time the compressor is triggered into pulling the level down, it stays down for much longer. So this has the overall effect. It might then sound kind of more like the original track with no compression, but it also has that effect of pulling the whole track down. Don't particularly like that. So I don't really tend to use very long releases. What I will try to do, unless I'm either going for a very short release because I really want a very, very marked, audible sound, really bring that kind of tail of the sound up as much as possible, up as loud as possible for a special effect. Or I want to time it so that the release is kind of almost finished by the time the next significant note comes. And that, if you've got a whole track going, and this was your 2-bus, and you know that characteristic sound from EDM, that kind of pumping thing, the release is set so that it will have finished releasing by the time the next bass drum hits, by the time the next beat hits. So you get that kind of boof, 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 that kind of breathing sound that happens in very audibly compressed dance music. Now, I'm going to go somewhere in between. So I'm probably going to aim for something that's, not on every, because obviously we've got eighth notes and quarter notes in here. So I'm going to aim for something that's kind of in the middle. So let's have a go. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change the ratio. So I've done the attack first with a fast release and a high ratio. Then I did the release, and now I'm going to look at the ratio. I'm going to pull the ratio down until it sounds like the effect that I'm trying to achieve, which in this case is audible but not excessive. Okay, so I've settled on 3. A common ratio for the mix bus is 4:1. Most people seem to, it's one of the settings on the SSL. The G series, mix channel has settings of 2, 4, and 10. So that's your kind of SSL thing. So the 2 is more of your instrumental thing. 4 is your mix bus. 10 is extreme kind of, that real pumpy sound. So here we're at 3, which is, it's audible compression. If I turn it down to 1, you'll hear the difference. So I want to hear it, but I don't want it to be extreme. Let's listen to 3, and then I'll whack it back up to 13. You can hear the difference. So it's still allowing me a natural sound. Now that's a combination of, I've allowed some of the transient through, so I'm getting a natural transient. I'm releasing reasonably quickly, so I'm just bringing up the character of the sound, but not really kind of, not going for one of those extreme things, either by clamping it down to nothing or by, having such a fast release that it's really, really ridiculously pumpy. So I'm trying to keep a natural shape on the sounds. And then I've got this ratio 3:1, which is not too extreme. It's audible, but not too extreme. Now, the final thing that I would do is I would just check my threshold. So I've got it set quite high at the moment, so we can hear really, really clearly. I should say quite high. I mean, I've got it set quite a lot. In other words, low. So I've got the threshold set low enough that it's doing lots and lots of, there's lots of stuff going in over the threshold. So we can clearly hear what's going on with the compressor. So I'm going to wind that up. In other words, reduce the amount of audio going over the threshold, and let's have a listen. Okay, so I've settled somewhere around about -35, and that's given me, it's not quite as much as we had set, but it is giving me that audible sound. Now, obviously what's happened now is that my makeup gain, if you remember, because we've moved the threshold, and the makeup gain is now slightly off. So let's just quickly set that. And I'm setting that by ear. I'm not looking at the meters because it just does get a little bit confusing. Sometimes it's, it's music. We listen to it. We don't look at it. We don't sit with a book of waveforms. So I just sometimes find that I have to look away from what I'm doing to be able to make an accurate judgment. Otherwise, you get into kind of confirmation bias. I'm really happy with that setting. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that as a starting position for the rest of my instruments. So I'm going to copy that and paste it into each of the other instruments, apart from the bass, because we're going to have a quick listen to the bass on its own. Now you can hear that's really choking the bass frequencies. And if we just simply paste in the settings that we've got for the other instruments, it's better, but it's still a little bit too choky. So I'm gonna change the settings now. I'm gonna go back, turn the ratio up a bit, turn the decay down. Okay, it's still compressing a little bit too much for me. I'm getting too much of the bass being sucked out and not enough of the effect that I'm actually after. So I'm going to carry on tweaking. Okay, I think I found the sweet spot. Let's just quickly check with it off as well. Now I'm going to quickly just go through each instrument and just make sure that because I've set this with the violin ones playing full tilt, it's going to be slightly different. The other instruments aren't sending quite as much signal in, so I'm just going to check them quickly one by one. Okay, I'm happy with that. Let's switch to the mix window and let's compare with the compressors, without the compressors. So I hope you can hear what I'm going for there. So what I've done is I've taken what is the raw sound, which is kind of a little bit flat. It's just a little bit plain and vanilla sounding for me. Obviously, this is out of all context. So if I was writing a track with a full orchestration and spending a bit more time on it, I might decide that some of these effects, need to be different. But in the context of this, where this is all we have, what we're getting by putting these compressors in and just changing the character of each of the sounds very slightly is we're getting something that suddenly sounds a little bit more exciting. It sounds a little bit more vibey and interesting to listen to. Okay, so let's very quickly chat through what's the difference between the different compressors. I'm going to switch them all to VCA, and then I'm going to duplicate them all and then quickly set up FET and Opto, and we can switch between them. Okay, so let's quickly switch between the compressors just so you can hear. First up is the Studio VCA. I'll let you guess what unit this looks like. Next one up would be the Vintage FET. Again, it's pretty recognizable. And then the Vintage Opto. So let's jump between them. So VCA, FET, then Opto. Okay, so you can hear, they're audible differences. There are audible differences. The other thing that you can do is you can add as many compressors as you want. So if we wanted to go slightly extreme and start adding them together. Obviously, we've got a slight volume change happening because the makeup gains aren't set correctly. But you can hear what's going on here. So different kinds of compressors act in different ways. What is the difference? So VCA stands for voltage controlled amplitude. The most well-known VCA compressor is probably the DBX 160, which is a great compressor for drums. You'll probably see a lot of compressors that are modeled on that design. And in fact, although this is obviously modeled on the Focusrite Red 3, if we look at classic VCA, yeah, it kind of looks DBX 160-ish. You get very fast attacks and releases with the VCA compressor, and so it's great for drums and rhythmic content, that kind of stuff. Really can be quite aggressive sounding, but that's the VCA. Then we've got the FET style, and so here you can see very clearly that this is modeled on a 1176, is a really kind of characterful sounding compressor. You put stuff through it for the kind of fat quality that it imparts on things. It's really, really great on vocals, and some people use it on vocals with not a lot of compression going on, just to get the sound of it, and then using other different compressors, either in parallel or in series, to really hone down the vocal sound. I wouldn't stick it on a violin, to be honest, or a cello particularly. But I would use it on woodwinds. I really like it on woodwinds and brass. It sounds great on those. But it has that sound. It's not. It doesn't react as fast as the VCA. So FET compressor. Think about your 1176s. Think about character sound, about fatness and vibe. That's what those are really kind of key for. So looking at the final Opto compressor, this is kind of designed to look a little bit like an LA2A, I guess. I'm not quite sure what this is designed to look like. So optical, it literally is optical, and for that reason, it's really, really non-linear. So you get lots of kind of weirdnesses that creep in with optical compressors. Having said that, they can be very, very musical, and typically the most famous thing to use the LA2A for is the bass. Lots of people like putting live bass through it. And again, it gives you a very kind of, it can give you a very kind of full round fat sound. It's not clinical. It's vibey again. So that's the kind of Opto. There is one more, which we've not got up here, but it's VariMU, variable mu. I had the fabulous Manley VariMU compressor, which is now in our studio at Spitfire, which I love. There's obviously Fairchild, super famous VariMU compressors. And basically what's happening is it is altering the ratio based on the material that's coming into it. So it looks kind of weird. Let's get one up so you can have a quick look at it. So you can see here you've got your input gain and your threshold, and then there's this thing, time constant. Now the time constant is a bit of a weird, it has set attack and release times, and you can look up what these are kind of set to, but it's one of those things again where it's kind of experimentation really, and just seeing what sounds right on the track. People tend to use it more on bus compression, I guess. I've seen more people using the Fairchilds as bus compressors than as individual instrument compressors. Same for the Manley. When I was using the Manley regularly in my studio, I tended to use it as a bus compressor. And it's incredibly good at that, and you can get a very nice, it's not quite as snappy and intense as the SSL bus compressor, but you can get a really kind of round, fat sound. It's quite good for orchestral music. So just to summarize again, VCA, very fast, very transient-y, good for drums. The FET, very aggressive, punchy, fat sound. The Opto, warm, again, fat, musical, very, kind of good at these kind of long sounds, these nice bassy sounds and things like that. VariMU, whole mix kind of type of scenario, automatic adjusting of itself as the music is going into it. So as the music is kind of playing, it's adjusting itself according to what you're feeding it. So it can give you really good results as well. So that's a quick overview of how I use compression with this one example. If you want to see more stuff, if you want me to dive a little bit deeper into this, then just leave me a comment below. Hope some of this was interesting or useful, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Sorry about my voice. I've had the most horrific man flu for the last kind of 10 days, and I'm just getting over it, but I haven't quite got my voice back yet. Anyway, so thanks very much for watching. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.